Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Aaron Turner. I'm the first fully funded postdoctoral Knapp Fellow of the Knapp Foundation. And today I'm speaking with Professor Laurence Hemming, the director of the Knapp Foundation, to find out more about what the Knapp Foundation is, what it does, and what you can do to support it. So, Laurence, I wonder if you could start by discussing what motivated you to start the foundation and what it actually does.
Let's begin by asking, what is the Knapp Foundation? The Knapp Foundation is something very, very old, something that could trace its history back, as it were, centuries. It's simply a loose affiliation of scholars. That is to say, a group of people who have come together around the question of scholarship, and I'll talk more about that shortly. Why did we put it together? We put it together for a number of reasons, but I want to start by giving a very practical example of why we put it together. Let's put it, just to put you on the spot somewhat, we put it together because of you. I met you when you had just completed a PhD in Thucydides. Your own history in the writing of that PhD is, in my view, remarkable. You came to Greek scholarship out of just love of Greek history and the Greek language for itself. It gripped you at a certain point in your life and it wouldn't leave you alone. And you discovered Thucydides. And when you and I met, you'd invited me to give a paper at a conference for you. You were struggling to find a job, your first job after getting your PhD. And you were discovering that everybody was interested, as it were, in the fashionable aspects of Thucydides, but you were having real trouble getting anybody involved in your project, which is about Thucydides himself. And yet not Thucydides considered as some Greek person who lived 2.5 millennia ago, but rather what it is about Thucydides that speaks to us right now. The project that you were trying to get funded as a postdoctoral project was asking the question, how can we understand what historical truth is? That's what you discovered, that nobody was particularly interested in asking that question. And yet everybody is concerned with history. An awful lot of the agony of the debates online at the present time, the debates in the press, are about history, about how it is, about whether or not we can trust existing accounts of it, about how we understand who we ourselves are and who we are in relation to others through history. So we met you and you couldn't get a job, and we were wanting to raise some questions about the way in which university research is going. So we decided to put the foundation together. We gave you a postdoctoral fellowship. We said to you that we didn't expect you to get involved in the building of the foundation. And you said, you've been very nice to me, I'm going to be nice back, rolled your sleeves up, and you've become an absolutely central part of the building of the foundation. So who is involved and how is it structured? When I said that we put the foundation together as something very old, I really meant that. And it's something that we've considered a great deal over the last 3 years. We got charitable status 2 years ago. We've never wanted to build something separate from the existing universities. We think that's wrong. We've never wanted to build a fledgling new university. Some people are doing that because of their frustration at the direction of the universities at the present. Again, I don't think that's possible or even right in this country. But on the other hand, without doubt, there are questions about the direction of the large and behemoths that many of the universities have become. It would be true to say that overall, they have been pulled in every direction. You could even say that to a certain extent, they've lost a sense of what being a university actually is. Lots of people have tried to ask what a university is. And again, we can discuss that perhaps further down the line. But above all, what really ignites the university as a possibility in Western Europe is an even older idea that isn't Western European at all, and that is the college of committed scholars who come together, and they come together under certain possibilities, things that actually make their scholarship possible. So we've tried to design the foundation to function, albeit in an ad hoc way and following UK charitable law, to look like that most ancient of institutions, an institution that predates even Western Europe, the college. So we've called each other fellows. We've appointed an advisory board under which we sit. It doesn't have a constitutional role in our existence because we're a charity. We have to be answerable to the UK government for that. But nevertheless, in order to maintain standards, we put together a group of very fine, highly reputable international scholars with one concern in particular in mind. We found people who would say to us, both when we were getting things right and when we were getting things wrong. We had the courage to find they come from very wide backgrounds. We deliberately chose people who would tell us the truth. We also wanted to guarantee ourselves freedom. We wrote into the constitution of our charitable founding document that we had to be independent of any other organization, even ones that we work with. That's our commitment to academic freedom. There's a lot of talk about academic freedom at the moment, and the UK government has even established a regulator for academic freedom. And I think that's been a good thing, and I know some of the people who worked very hard to get that in place. But it's all very well having a regulator, but you have to have a commitment to academic freedom even before you start regulating over it. And what does academic freedom do? It isn't the freedom to say whatever you like, to voice any opinion you like. It is the freedom to explore, but to explore faithfully, to let whatever truth you are trying to understand speak for itself. In other words, the academic freedom isn't about you, the scholar, although you have to exercise it. It's about what it is that your scholarship is about, letting that speak freely and, in fact, truly. It's also about independence from every kind of influence. You and I have often spoken about those words that you hear more and more now, research shows, and people talk a lot about academic research in the modern context. But we all know that research, let's just say, can be pushed, can be guided by the zeitgeist, as it were, by current fashionable trends. Certain things become unsayable, so that even when they're true, they become difficult to say. It's what has led to all the discussions around whether or not cancel culture actually exists. Genuine freedom is freedom from external interference. So we've tried to build an organization which is self-financing. We've been very lucky. We've thrown ourselves on the mercy of some very generous benefactors, and they've continued to be generous. We need to find more, because I'm absolutely confident that there are many more people like you who need financial support and financial independence in order to pursue the truth. We discovered that from the very earliest days, the notion of the college, and I said it's not a European idea, it actually has its roots in the madrasas, both of the Levant, which is where the idea came from in the 12th century, with crusaders or pilgrims, not quite clear who, but three of them each brought the notion of the self-funding and independent college to the idea of the emerging academic guilds, universitas. It's a word that means guild, the medieval guilds that had begun to be established in a number of places in Europe. That resulted in the foundation of three astonishingly powerful bodies: Bologna University, Paris University, and Oxford University. The structure of Oxford University is remarkably similar now to the one that emerged in the 13th century when it was formally incorporated. There were organizations that existed there before, that without which that incorporation couldn't have happened. But what they had above all else was independence. And then a third thing, an interior collegiality. That is to say, a friendship, but not friendship with each other. We don't just want to, we are friends. We are very friendly with each other. We respect each other. But the genuine friendship, the philia, if you like, in Greek, is to knowledge itself, a genuine concern for allowing the true to speak itself. And that means getting to know it, dwelling with it, being friendly with it. So those are the things that we had in mind in the building of the foundation. We've structured it. As I've already said, we have an academic advisory board of very eminent people. We have a board of trustees because we're required to. They're small. And then we have the fellows ourselves. And we are the ones who do the scholarship, as it were.
On that point, then, I mean, you mentioned my history project. I wonder if you could touch briefly on other areas of research currently being explored through the foundation.
Well, I'm not a scientist, and it struck me that if we went down that route, we would get ourselves into trouble very quickly. So we don't cover any areas of the sciences. It's possible for us to cover the social sciences, but in practice, so far, we haven't. We've tended to focus on the humanities. I don't have, or we don't have, as a foundation, a grand plan of research. So we didn't sit down and say, well, this is what we'd like to research. What we went out to do is to look for people who needed support, and most importantly, people who had failed to get support, even though we could prove through our international advisors and through a peer review process that they were asking really important questions. So what are we actually doing? Well, we work in a number of areas at the moment. I mean, you've mentioned classics and classical history, history itself, philosophy, law. We are looking at issues around managerialism. We have a very interesting project on the history and presence of Islam in Europe. These are the kinds of projects that we think matter. They matter because we have people who are asking very, very serious questions in them. And they matter because we want to link those questions. We want to give them a public face. That's one of the things that the foundation does. One of the areas in which I think the universities have sometimes obscured the face of the research that they've done, not deliberately, but let's just say it's become detached. You know, the phrase you hear is often ivory tower. I don't think that that's quite right. But nevertheless, we've had a very strong sense that the research and the scholarship that we undertake has to be publicly accountable. It has to relate to the disciplines as they exist, and it has to relate to what people care for in those disciplines. Many of the people who fund us are people who went to university. Often they were the first people in their families to go to university, and they loved what they found. And what we have said to them is that, trust us, we will look after the very thing that you loved when you got to university and discovered a lifelong love of. Many of those people have gone on to have very successful careers, which is why they've had a little bit of spare cash to give us as well. But they've never lost that love of what drew them to scholarship and learning in the first place. One of the things that we've wanted to say to people is we will care for what you learnt to care for in your own experience in university life.
You've mentioned the universities, of course. So how does the Knapp Foundation work alongside and with the universities?
Well, all of us have got relations to the universities. You have an appointment as a research associate at Royal Holloway. I'm an honorary professor at Lancaster University. David McGrogan is a full-time associate professor at Northumbria. Each of us has maintained important links with the existing system. And as I said earlier, we are not trying to build something separate from the existing universities. On the other hand, we are trying to give people the freedom to undertake certain kinds of scholarship. There's enormous pressure in the universities now to, let's say, finish a PhD in 3 years flat, finish a postdoctoral program, a book, in just a couple of years. We've taken the opposite view. You can take as long as you like, as it were, provided we've got the money to support it, to let a question unfold. Now, we don't just lock you in a room and forget about you, but shoving the occasional food tray and check underneath the slot in the door. We keep asking you, how's it going? We draw you into conversation about that. We encourage you to be in debate with the key figures in your field, something you, for instance, have been particularly good at. It seems that you are quite fearless in writing to some of the biggest names in your area, and astonishingly enough, they seem to like you and they write back. And they've even agreed to do things with us. We put conferences, seminars on. We have a regular weekly seminar during the year. We've had some of you and I run it, and we've had some of the most eminent people in our field have both come to it, have been made guest appearances in that seminar. It's been a roaring success. We also have a formal interior review process for all of us, including myself. We ask ourselves, well, how is the progress going? What is the question here? What are we, how are we developing towards where we want to be? But without a kind of sword of Damocles that you must finish by a certain time. You must. We're really interested in the question itself and in letting people run free with the question, albeit a cold, determined freedom, a freedom that has discipline. I mean, for instance, just one small example, we both require that our fellows gain the necessary languages to look at the archives in their area in their original languages, but we, in turn, we commit to helping them gain those languages. You have gained a thoroughly good working knowledge of German in the time that you've been with us. We're hoping to find enough money to get rid of that awful German accent of yours. That's a little unfair, but you're nevertheless, you are now translating from German under contract with a major UK publisher. That's unsurprising to me. Other skills that people need, we would explore how to get them in order to allow the truth of something to come to fruition, both in its own language, and then you, as the successful fellow, translate that into the Anglosphere if it's not an English text. We've been international, as you know, right from the beginning. We've had links. We have one of our fellows is Georgia. That's Georgia Caucasus, not Georgia Atlanta. Another of our fellows was until recently working in the United Arab Emirates. We are thoroughly international and very committed to the internationalism of scholarship.
To speak as well briefly about the question of truth that you've mentioned, I mean, what we say on our website is that we open inquiries into truth itself. So, to what extent have the universities possibly lost sight or clarity of the question of truth that initially grounded their emergence?
That's a really good question, and it goes right to the heart of what we are trying to do. When I first began discussions with some other scholars on the possibility of something like the Knapp Foundation, and I said that one of its central concerns had to be truth itself, they all got rather embarrassed. Academics do now. We all shuffle and look at our feet and say, well, I mean, it's very difficult to talk about truth. I don't think it is difficult to talk about truth. And in fact, people are very concerned about truth. It's not accidental that the BBC or Facebook employ fact checkers. We worry about the truth of what is said in the public domain. We're not very good at curating it. And when you press people to explain what truth is, they have vague memories of the correspondence theory of truth or the coherence theory of truth and so forth. Truth matters It really does matter. You want what the truth of what's in your bank account to be true, as it were. And yet we have very strange ideas about truth. We started saying that truth is merely a construct, or that you have your truth and I have my truth. Now, I could talk for a long time about this, but let me talk about it in the context of the universities. The earliest way in which the questions that the universities considered emerged in the Western tradition, and we stand in that tradition unashamedly, not because it's the best of all traditions. You'll find many important Western scholars who will gleefully argue that there have been other as important, even more important at certain historical times, traditions than the Western tradition. But this is our tradition, so it's the one in which we stand. And one of the first people to try to think about the tradition as a tradition is somebody you and I have worked on a great deal, and that's Parmenides. And what's the title of his, well, the fragments we have, we think the title of his most important work was Aletheia, truth. This question absolutely drives Plato, it absolutely drives Socrates. What you and I have spent a lot of time doing is trying to trace the history of those questions as they arose from Parmenides, from Anaximander, from Heraclitus, from these Greeks that then passed, not in a direct line. I mean, most people assume that there's some kind of tram that runs historically from Athens, probably to the University of Paris around about 1205. It wasn't like that at all. The texts of the Greeks, the Platonists, the Aristotelians, the Neoplatonists, and the other traditions moved. They were often never lost, especially on the eastern side of the Byzantine Empire, but they weren't taken much notice of. But they did move around, and there were people who did take notice of them. It appears, for instance, the scholar Christopher Beckwith and the Arabist George Makdisi both talk about the way in which the concern for the ideas that the Greeks raised suddenly appear in Central Asia, and a particular way of discussing those ideas emerges at the same time, what they call the recursive question, what we know as the style of questioning that you'd find in Thomas Aquinas, for instance. This has long antecedents. Beckwith claims that it goes all the way back to a Buddhist tradition in Central Asia, which is then taken over by Islam, when Islam becomes the dominant religion in Central Asia, and moves down to the Levant, where both the curriculum and the style of questioning move with it. And they found the madrasas in the Levant, which is where those pilgrims or crusaders, whoever they were, who were such an important influence in the early European universities, found Greek ideas, a style of questioning which appears to have been developed from Greek thought, and a legal and organizational structure which came, well, again, Beckwith argues, from the Buddhist viharas up in Central Asia, which became madrasas, which then moved down to the Levant, and that produced the college structure, which laid the foundation for the Collège de 18 of Paris, for the first colleges in the University of Oxford and then Cambridge and elsewhere in Europe. But that's a history. That's a history of truth. And it was the truth itself. Now, in the refoundation of the universities in the German tradition, you have people like Schelling, who starts to say, you can't ask about the individual truth in any particular discipline unless you understand the truth, what makes the truth true. So it's all very well knowing what historical truth is, or even what truth is in engineering. If you don't know what makes the true true itself, you can't speak about the truth in the individual disciplines. Again, I could talk at length about that. I don't want to go too much off the deep end, as it were, but I could certainly point you to Schelling's lectures where that question is discussed. In other words, the refoundation of the universities in the 19th century, the question remained the same. What makes the true true, both universally and in the individual disciplines? That is what we are concerned with in the Knapp Foundation.
From a more practical standpoint, what is the wider role of the Knapp Foundation? What is the future of the Knapp Foundation?
Again, there's a lot of talk about what's wrong with the universities, and I just, when I first tried to think about this, I went to look at one of the first people to discuss this, a really interesting scholar called Adam Ulam. He was a Polish American. He was a refugee from post-war Poland. He'd had experience of the arrival of Stalinism in Poland. He ended up as a professor in Harvard. He wrote a really important book called Lenin and the Bolsheviks, which is really a biography of Lenin and the story of how the Bolsheviks became such an important influence on the whole eastern side of Europe and further afield. He wrote a book in 1972 called The Death, I think it's The Death or the Failure of the American University. He makes a really important point right at the beginning of that book. He says the universities have become obsessed with the way the world ought to be instead of the way it is. So universities have joined that tribe of organizations. I think even Mr. Starmer in the UK at the moment is talking about an activist government. We now have activist universities. My own view is that you can't change anything until you've understood it. It's that old reversal of Marx's 11th thesis on Feuerbach, if I remember it correctly. You have to understand something before you can change it. And to understand something means to know how it is, to dwell with it, to live with it. That would be, you asked about, you said, let's be more practical. I think scholarship is practical. Scholarship is the practical being with whatever is there and learning how to know its ways, to know its foibles, to know where it comes from, to know its history. That's been your experience working with us in your fellowship. It's been my experience as a scholar over decades that it's some of the questions which beset me as an undergraduate, I've only been able to answer because of years and years both of learning and also of unlearning. So the future of the Knapp Foundation is to witness to that, to what it means to press for an understanding of the way the world is before. I mean, by all means, if you then want to go and change it, and if we've done our work well, if we've taught you how to live well with how the world actually is, then maybe, just maybe, you'll have the tools to change it. But you can't start by saying, oh, you know, I don't like the way the furniture is in this room. I'm going to move it around. Because otherwise we all endlessly start moving the same furniture around over and over again. And we discover that not only are we moving the furniture around, but we're moving it around in the same ways as others have done it without even realizing that's what we're doing. Lenin called this total mobilization. So did Ernst Jünger. It was a way, as it were, to whip a society up into a constant frenzy of activity. Let's just learn to live with the furniture before deciding how best to rearrange it. Let's find out why people put it in these places in the first place. So the future of the foundation, I think, is to work alongside the universities, to find people like you and who have really important questions, and to prove those questions are important by appealing to people who can tell us whether or not that is the case and whose advice we really trust. It's really established scholars, internationally famous scholars in their fields. And to call the universities back to what they in fact already are, to that long history. And it's not the long history of a particular kind of organization or a particular kind of way of doing things. It's just a history of why the true is true. The future of the foundation is simply to get alongside the universities and in our own small way, but nevertheless not insignificant, I hope, to witness to the truth and to why the true is true.
Professor Hemming, thank you very much.